Welcome back. Now, environmental and human rights activists converge on the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition yesterday, demanding that the South African government halt coal exports to Israel. The protest comes amid revelations that more than 1.6 million tons of South African coal has been sold to Israel since October 2023. This is, of course, when the genocide had begun in Gaza. Over 60,000 lives have been taken by Israel, with many of that being children. Joining me now, I'd like to welcome the president of the General and Industrial Workers Union of South Africa. Of course, they led the march yesterday, Mametlwe Sebei. Mametlwe, always good to have you on. Thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure to be here and greeting to your listeners.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. Mametlwe, I think let's just start off, of course, with regards to this march. Was there a representative from DTIC that, of course, came in and was listening to some of what the protesters had to say, and of course a memorandum that was of course set out?
Yes, I mean the minister wasn't there, but a senior official within the Department of Trade and Industry came to receive the memorandum, which was handed in Pretoria. I think we also received a response, or rather officials also probably in, Cape Town, but also Durban. But I think more than, just submitting a memorandum, it was really about making a public statement. And I think that was, clearly and unequivocally made by, a turnout, quite an impressive turnout in all the three cities, that is Pretoria, Durban, and Cape Town.
Mametlwe, let's talk about, obviously, this history of trade in terms of coal. I'm going to start off, of course, when it comes to Glencore, because, of course, this is the company at the eye of the storm with regards to that. For the viewers that obviously haven't, been, is unaware of actually the trade that happens between Glencore and Israel, talk to us about that, the history that has occurred with regards to the trade between this company and, of course, Israel.
It has been going on for years. South Africa, after Colombia, is the second biggest supplier of coal to Israel. I don't know what's actually happening now with Colombia, because their president has made a declaration that he will not allow any Colombian coal. Of course, this issue of non-compliance with that directive by companies in Colombia. But if that were to be the case, in fact, South Africa, mainly Glencore, would be the biggest, supplier of coal to Israel, as it is at the moment, both through its operations in South Africa and, of course, in Colombia itself. So it is, the same logic that we see playing out in relation to the workers of Glencore themselves in their operations here in Colombia, but also, in relation to communities. Lest we forget that, coal is killing miners due to not only poverty, wages, and horrendous conditions in which miners are living, but also, toxic sulfur that is darkening, the bodies of the miners, is darkening the air, the water, the soil, and everything in their communities, killing, thousands. There is about 42,000 people who die annually due to pollution in this country. And we say that this is a reflection of, a private corporate ownership that, value. Basically, they are profiteering over the lives of their workers and of their communities. And it's the same logic that informed their indifference over a genocide currently happening in Israel, in Gaza, because this coal is fueling a military industrial complex that is actually carrying out that genocide against the Palestinians.
Mametlwe, I want to bring in Astron Energy because there's obviously a relationship between them and Glencore. If I stand to be corrected, Glencore is a majority shareholder within Astron Energy. Um, what is happening with regards to Astron Energy and, of course, supplies of energy that has been happening to Israel? Talk to us about that.
Well, I'm not well informed with respect to that aspect, except to say that, I mean, this one also another brand in South Africa in a South African fuel industry that we also accuse of the environmental degradation, of contribution to climate or greenhouse emissions, but also their complicity in all of these crimes. You see, it is very criminal that you have a South African fuel industry being at the center of a sustenance and fueling of the regime that this country, more than any other, went to international courts of justice armed with all the facts that graphically paint the industrial scale, destruction of human life. And to put that into perspective, because South Africans look at those numbers and they think these are quite minimal, figures we're talking about. For an enclave such as Gaza, the amount of people killed as proportion of the population would have been equivalent in South Africa of a killing of 6 million out of the population of 62 million. That is a scale of death, and many of which is obviously children, women, elderly, in gross violation of international law, clear indication that these are not even combatants, not even that we want the death of the combatants, because let's understand, the Palestinians have the right of resistance, even by means of arms, against an occupation, against a settler colonialism that has been dispossessing them of their lands for decades with complete impunity. But this is also the fuel to a complex and a military-industrial complex that is destroyed. Every civilian infrastructure imaginable, from hospitals, clinics, schools, houses, to anything that made life possible, water and energy supply, infrastructure. So this, and the argument that you have a situation wherein the coal is just a normal trading, it's not true, because Israel is using starvation, is using a blockade, including a refusal or rather a cut off electricity, water, as a war strategy, and as a means of carrying out a genocide against the Palestinians.
Okay. After the break, I continue my conversation with Mametlwe Sebei, and we're going to continue the talks with regards to what some would say one hand washing the other. South Africa has that ICJ case against Israel. That's great. But on the other side, there is still trade of energy that is being conducted with Tel Aviv. I continue with Mametlwe after the break. Welcome back. I'm in conversation with Mametlwe Sebei, president of GIWUSA. They led a march yesterday in Pretoria to the offices of the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition. Again, thank you so much for staying with us, Mametlwe. Mametlwe, here's the thing, right? And of course, it's a paradoxical scenario that we faced with. South Africa, of course, taking Israel to the ICJ at the start of last year. And now we've got a scenario where still, and of course this has a historical context to it, trade of energy that is being conducted between Pretoria and Tel Aviv. For any person looking at this, they would of course be scratching their head and saying, how is this being done? How is this still being done, Mametlwe?
Criminal treachery. I think we've got to call it what it is. And it's very simple really to explain, but let me start with the hypocrisy here. You see, you have a government which, as I've said, we can be confident they are aware of what is happening because they instructed a team of lawyers that lay out a case in graphic details before the world at the International Court of Justice. The scale of destruction, the killing, and how that actually amount to genocide, chronicling all the expressed and stated objectives of these operations by the senior cabinet, military, and of course political establishment in the Israeli regime itself. That you could have this government with all of that knowledge and still continuing, with this trade. I mean, that is just mind-boggling. But more than that, let's not forget, this is a government that was elevated to power by the struggle against apartheid. A key component of the struggle was international solidarity, which actually invented a campaign of boycott, divestment, and sanctions. The BDS does not originate, and it doesn't originate from the Palestinians. They learned that from the South African struggle. And why was that a campaign actually launched? It was launched against the background of the Sharpeville massacre, in which 68 people were killed. And I can say only 68 people, without coming across as if I think that the lives of our people are less important. And 68 people killed at Sharpeville were too many. But if there were too many and we agree that is an equal value to human life, how do we explain that we have to argue against such government made up of people who called for a boycott and sanction against apartheid government for killing 68 people, that the same government needs convincing that it's simply unacceptable to be actually fueling an industrial complex that is carrying out a genocide on the scale of tens of thousands. And if you're to translate that into South African language, it will actually be equivalent of millions, that is 6 million out of the population of the 62 million that is equivalent of people that have been killed in Gaza in relation to their population at that moment, if you are actually to translate it in South African terms. How do we even have this conversation? The explanation is very simple. You see, the betrayal of the ANC of the struggle for liberation in this country and of the black majority is linked very well with the betrayal of the Palestinians. After all, a foreign policy of any government is but an application of its domestic policy on the international affairs. And what is it that informs the policy? Because the policy is really a continuation of the fundamental and dominant interest in the economy. And once the ANC in 1994 acceded to capitalism, where the economy, the mines, and of course the land continue to be privately owned, and that ownership is monopolized by the same corporations that benefited under apartheid here, that are part of global capitalism in which Western imperialism, Zionist interests are very powerful and dominant. And it was inevitable that they will betray the black working class in this country, and that will also translate into a policy of betrayal at an international level that is reflected in their treachery, which basically, is what we see, where they're basically backing with the hounds and running with the herd, insofar as Israel and the struggle of the Palestinians are concerned.
Mametlwe, you brought something important when it comes to the African National Congress, and my next question speaks on that, because as per the document, and I have it in front of me from BDS, in 2013, Glencore acquired South African-based Extracta and inherited local partner Patrice Motsepe's African Rainbow Minerals Gold. In that year, Extracta bragged of 13 million tons of coal exports. And of course, outside of Europe, Israel was the largest purchaser of South African operations coal production. The relationship, obviously, it's well known that Patrice Motsepe is the brother-in-law of our current president, President Cyril Ramaphosa. If you were to believe what many experts or analysts are saying, Patrice Motsepe could be contesting for the ANC president position, of course, when it becomes available in 2027. Talk to us about that, because surely President Cyril Ramaphosa, who, of course, as the head of the state, gave the thumbs up or the authorization for this ICJ case to occur. He should be well known with regards to, of course, the export of coal that is currently happening to Israel.
Aware. I mean, we've protested. This is not a first protest. you would know that throughout the year, last year, we've had the South African energy embargo against Israel. We have led the protest to Glencoe. We have been engaging with government officials, particularly in DECO, but also people at Union Building, in his presidency and in the office of the president. So it's not based on ignorance, right? They themselves, I mean, the Minister of Trade and Industry at some point even actually responded to us. And one of the reasons that he gave were very shameful and scandalous and revealing of the kind of thinking that is actually going on there, where I think he made a point about how this would be them violating their obligations in terms of the World Trade Organization, a treaty organization that for all intents and purposes is dead. Not that it should have mattered, not that it should have determined the position of any genuine democratic state, particularly the one that has a history in a struggle against apartheid, on a matter of fundamental principle like this, where there is a question of apartheid state in Israel, there is a question of oppression, occupation of land dispossession that has now culminated into a bloody, genocidal, ethnic cleansing military operation that has killed tens and thousands of the Palestinians. He is aware, and they are profiting from it, but that's the problem. Obviously, they don't know any morality, don't know any principle. They worship one thing and one thing only, right? Profiteering, wealth accumulation, and that's it. You can't talk principles with a capitalist. And that's not only in relation to the Palestinians. It's evident in the violations of the rights of the black miners that made this very president, getting all the fortunes, is by the same logic that we also saw him inciting Lone Mill, a company in which was a shareholder, against the mine workers at Lone Mill. That led to the Marikana massacre. And of course, these miners, from whom and from whose struggles he owes all of his political and personal fortunes. Ramaphosa will be nothing today as a businessman, as a politician, without the mine workers. That did not stop him from inciting a massacre against them at Marikana. That has not stopped him, of course, from allowing a cheap black migrant labor system that the miners organized into NUM to resist, but also that will not stop him into collaborating with those same companies and allowing them to fuel genocide in Palestine.
Mametlwe, I want to bring in three individuals, of course, that have portfolios, or the minister of these portfolios. Of course, the Minister of Mineral Resources and Petroleum Energy, that's Gwede Mantashe. You've got, of course, the Minister of Transport, who's Barbara Creecy, and, of course, the Minister of Department of Trade and Industry, Park Stow. All of them are ANC deployees. When you look at the African National Congress's constitution, its memorandum, it says it stands in solidarity with the people of Palestine. But when you have, of course, all three of these departments, which, of course, plays its various roles in the energy part of it, the trade part of it, and, of course, the transportation part of how all of this amalgamates, what is GIWUSA's take on this, given that it's an ANC slogan to say we stand with the people of Palestine, and yet within these ministerial portfolios, all of this together is playing a role of allowing this energy and coal to be exported to Israel as this genocide becomes more deadlier every single day?
The matter is that political policy in a final analysis reflect the dominant interest in the economy of any government. And once, as I've said, the ANC acceded to management of capitalism in 1994, retaining the political economic architecture that allow for a continuation of dictatorship of the corporate monopolies that dominate the economy, the minerals and the land ownership in this country, and dictate every aspect of our life. It was unavoidable that even on matters of foreign policy, whatever declarations comes out of the ANC conferences will be hollow, because that is true of every policy of the ANC. As I've said, they are bargaining with the hounds and running with the hare on every matter. Look at what the ANC says in respect of the classes in this country. They always speak about working class bias. Has that stopped them from implementing policies that have redistributed wealth, from the bottom to the top, elite of society, creating the most unequal society that has put to shame actual apartheid regime as a system of legislated inequality? Has that stopped the Marikana massacre, where they've chosen, the profiteering of the mining monopoly capital over the demands of the mine workers, despite that these workers were only fighting for the promise of the ANC of the better life for all, right? In the most recent time, they carried out the massacre by means of starvation of workers of the miners at Stilfontein, which even the Palestinian tribunalists recognized it to be the same tactics that the Israelis are applying in Palestinian territories, in Gaza itself. And hence, they actually expressed solidarity, condemning that act in the process. And in a marvelous demonstration of solidarity and their understanding of the hypocrisy of this government. So I'm saying that it's not just the president, it's also the ANC. The minister of minerals and resources. This is the most recent Secretary General of the National Union of Mine Workers, and who ought to be talking about, who ought to be understanding anyone better than anybody in that cabinet, the plight of the miners. I've seen a statement quite recently, in respect of artisanal miners saying, well, I'm not going to give the licenses to workers from, Lesotho, Mozambique, and so on. But this is a man who had no qualms in rising into the leadership of the union, the core of which are the same migrant miners. When Ramaphosa, and with the likes of Mantaja being union officials, led the great mine workers' strike of 1987, at that point in time, 70% of the miners were foreign migrant workers. These are the workers that made all of these individuals, but also the current leadership of the ANC what it is.
Mametlwe, always good having you on. Thank you so much for joining us on News in Focus on Hilaal TV.
Thank you.
That's Mametlwe Sebei, President of the General and Industrial Workers Union of South Africa. Well, that's all we have for you here on News in Focus. If you've missed today's episode, be sure to find it on our YouTube channel. From myself, Hospital, the rest of the team in Johannesburg, to have yourself a good weekend, but most importantly, a safe one. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.